That's when the policeman said, "But where are your keys?"
Oh! Oh,
We're going to have to come up with something better than
we
that.
are.
Hey guys, welcome to the Cloudists. My name is Jeff DeVerter.
I'm Kent Kingery.
Yes, you are.
I have
We're
been
here to
all
talk
day.
again about all things cloud. Now, admittedly, just like our sign, well, trust me, it's blue. Tends to be focused more on the Microsoft space, but there's a lot going on outside of the Microsoft world that, well, we even have a little news we'll talk about today. But we want to make sure that this takes a more holistic approach to what's happening from a cloud perspective and really give you our 2 cents. As we said since episode zero, you might ask, why a 0? Well, it was 0 because we were just trying to figure out what we were doing. But what we started saying even then was these are conversations that we have whether the camera's on or not, and we just decided to get a camera out and
Did we get a camera
and
out?
record it and let you guys get a little taste of what goes on from a cloud perspective.
And actually, we're remote from our normal location.
We are. We're
We're
trying.
normally in a different room.
That's right.
We have a kind of a portable setup. We're seeing how it goes.
Pretty awesome. I hope you.
Yeah, it's actually maybe we'll do a walkthrough at some point on one of the episodes of behind
making
the
of the Cloudists. That would be awesome.
So talk to me about news. We always like news. We're news junkies. Talk to me about news.
So we had some news at Rackspace this week.
Oh, yes, we did.
Yeah, so I started with my multi-cloud banter, and we announced our support this week for actually Google Compute. So Rackspace will be bringing a service offering to market a little later this year, where we will wrap around it's a CPE, isn't it? Isn't that what they call their support?
I think that's what they call it, right? Is it CRE? Customer reliability. Customer reliability engineering, I think, is the term for it.
That's right. And so we'll be bringing an offering to market at Rackspace later this year, which is interesting because as you think about what's happening in the cloud world, you hear some niche stuff going on still in the cloud world, but there's still, we work for Rackspace, but the reality is there's really 3 big clouds.
Absolutely.
And what's happening is you have this coalescing. That's my word I got out of the word of the day. Of services and capabilities that are now starting to really wrap around these hyperscale cloud offerings. In fact, later on we're going to talk about what Microsoft is even doing to build out around that as well. But Rackspace is going to bring support to the 3rd of the big clouds later this year around Google Compute. So that's pretty exciting, I think. And not the only player in those spaces. But what's interesting. This is our pitch for Rackspace right now, by the way, is that what we do as part of our heritage, our 18-year heritage, has really been around how do we help customers be successful with the technology they choose, and specifically in the cloud world.
Right.
And so this just extends that offering and that capability.
Well, and I think one of the things it does for us is it allows us to continue to be fairly neutral. I say fairly neutral. I mean, obviously, there's some of the more minor public cloud players that we don't support, but that's actually okay. I think there's value in being able to support the 3 that we have because they are the big players. I mean, every time you look and see any sort of ranking, it's always those 3.
Well, and you use the term, and I'm gonna adjust your term a little. The minor cloud players, and I'm going to change the word from minor to boutique. Because I think more and more what we're going to see is is not necessarily the death of clouds that aren't Google, Amazon, or Microsoft, but maybe even more of a proliferation of purpose-built clouds. Maybe that's for region, maybe that's for capability. Get behind a wall somewhere.
Yep.
China. Or something along those lines. So boutique clouds or hyperscale clouds?
Yeah, if you think about it, right, I mean, it's interesting to talk about the industry type clouds because you think about the unique requirements that healthcare has, for example, with HIPAA compliance and those sorts of things, or the banking industry has with PCI and PII and however many of the P star I's that there are. It makes it really, really compelling to have a provider that for that segment of that business that really needs it, you have that cloud capability.
Now, just as I make that statement, I'm going to go and contradict it. And one of the other announcements this week is what Microsoft is doing in the Azure space to help government cloud along. So, at first we had Azure, and then we had Azure Government. And Azure Government was a purpose-built cloud, which is separate, 100% separate from the Azure world. And its whole mission in life was to wrap around all of the rigor that was required to be able to support government workloads that one wouldn't intermingle with any other workloads.
Right.
Now the challenge there, once you have 2 things, is how do we keep them in lockstep? So over the past year, Microsoft has done a lot to get it off of Azure V1 into Azure V2. You know,
Okay.
we saw those updates in the public Azure,
Right.
you know, before that. And so now they're pretty close to feature match on the ARM space. But what they've added this week, and they talked about, and to be clear, that race to get things updated to ARM was really core functionality, IaaS, PaaS,
Sure.
you know, the base kind of stuff. But they've actually announced, and I got this interesting little tidbit from the Read It Quick, which I like Read It Quick because I can read it quick and then I can tell everybody about it.
It sounds like a convenience store for reading. Doesn't it? You're like a 7-Eleven of
I
reading.
feel like inappropriate accent.
Can we say 7-Eleven?
Yes.
They're not one of our sponsors.
They're not, but they make a tasty
I
slushy.
like the Slurpee.
Slurpee, not slushy.
Slushy.
So what Microsoft has gone on to add here in this space is BI capabilities, HD insights, and some of the Cortana intelligence suites. I thought they're not calling it Cortana. I think that freaks them out in some way. But really it's that intuitive cognitive capabilities inside of Azure that they've added.
Well, I think Cortana is interesting because that's the thing that people always look down at their bar and they see this thing that's always on and suggesting things to them, and they kind of get freaked out by the privacy things or by the all the information that's being gathered.
But it doesn't freak them out when they say, Alexa, play the Beatles.
Or Alexa, turn my lights off. Alexa, turn my dang lights off.
Now, what would be awesome is if you play this back in your house and things start happening.
Absolutely. Yeah,
because we listen to ourselves.
I guarantee if I listen to this at home, my Alexas are good because I got a dot in every room. Right? So,
I haven't gone quite to that level. In fact, I love the story when you lost power. We had the issues with the tornado.
Oh my gosh!
In your house.
And every single dot is coming back up, going, "I can't get to the internet. I can't find anything," and they're all talking to each other. So. Anyway.
Cloud stuff, the perils of cloud.
Yes.
So that's one of the things that's new. So that is enhanced capabilities for the Azure Federal Cloud.
Okay.
And that is all around the capabilities from the intelligence suites to big data to Power BI. Sorry, I was going to say BI Insights, but that's putting too many things together.
Yeah, that's putting too many insights in there. You know what's interesting though about the federal side of it? I think they've almost felt like, Red Hood stepchildren, right? Because they themselves obviously impose the compliance requirements, security requirements, et cetera. And so now to be able to have a cloud that meets their specific needs.
And is current.
And is current. Because as you pointed out, I mean, we have spent so much time working on our tooling here at Rackspace around ARM, Azure Resource Manager, and then to try and take our tools and sort of retrograde them back to V1 or the old ASM model has been somewhat difficult, and something that I don't know that we would necessarily want to spend a lot of resources on. So I think that's cool.
Right. In other news, last week somebody pushed the wrong button and took the internet down. Yeah. But hey, kudos to Amazon for not coming back and saying, hey, the flux capacitor stopped fluxing.
100%.
And come back and say, honest mistake, sorry. Oops.
Well, and it has been pointed out numerous places and numerous times over the last week and a half. Properly designed, your applications wouldn't have had an issue.
Yeah.
So I'll give you an example, right? Netflix is in that region, but they're also in other regions. But Netflix didn't see a burble, right? And so there are systems that are set up. So I think what this is while it's terrible that it happened, and in fact we talked about it, you and I even had an issue because that's where our
smart things wouldn't work.
Well, and that's where our graphics files were from our artists, right? Yes. So if you think about it, though, it's a wake-up call. Mm-hmm. It's a wake-up call to say, hey, you know what? You can't just jam any old thing into the cloud and expect it to work, right? You have to think through what happens because, again, remember, as you've always said, the cloud is somebody else's computer. Yeah. And clearly it was somebody else's computer that didn't exactly work the way it should.
Honest mistake. Oops. Yeah. Sorry, 10,000 people. But what's interesting, and this is really the news piece that I came to talk about a little more on here, is Google just had a big conference, their Cloud Next conference this week. And you had an exec from them get up and make a little bit of a pitch about why Google has been rated as the most stable cloud last year as far as hours of downtime. So now you've got the wolves coming back up and saying, oh, not fair because of XYZ, and the reason really that comes back. So here, I'll give you the exact states. And this is from GeekWire where I found this article. And that is that Google has stated to have only had 74 minutes of downtime in 2016. That's not a lot. Whereas compared to Microsoft Azure had 270 minutes of downtime, and Amazon 108. So in order of smallest to largest, it was Google from 74 to Amazon 108, and then Microsoft 270. So the Spinmeisters were busy,
Sure.
and they came out and they said, interesting metrics. Granted, now Mr. Google, you're saying that or Mrs. Google, you're saying that it's that much lower. It must be that much more stable. Now they're coming back and saying, well, let's look at the amount of regions that actually suffered downtime. So if we take the number or scale that we're supporting and look at it in proportion, then it's a little bit different. Right. So if you look at Google, Google's environment has, oh rats, I lost it. It's like six regions.
Yep.
They're in 6 regions. AWS, 16.
Yep.
Microsoft, 34.
34.
So if we were to take the amount of compute that's happening in these areas with the number of regions, the amount of stuff you have to keep up, you could probably come up with an amortized number that says, oh, one of these is smaller or larger. But it's always interesting to see how when one company makes a statement, the other ones come back and say, oh. So it goes back to your previous point. When somebody says, hey, let's move to the cloud, it'll be better, faster, cheaper, more stable, not necessarily true, because what we have here is just somebody else's compute, and it still requires the same amount of rigor if you're going to do it on-prem or even in a Rackspace.
Well, Kirsten, the reality is that even in your own premise, you're subject to issues. There's a reason that we talk about how many 9s of reliability we have, because ain't nobody talking about 100.
How many zeros?
Right? I mean, nobody's talking about that.
Right.
And so if you think about it, the same thing that you would need to do to put together a disaster recovery or a failover plan inside your own premise to somewhere else, you would definitely have to do for the cloud.
Yeah.
Right? Now the cloud, you know, I'll admit, I mean, I'm the same way. I sort of get this sense that, hey, somebody's watching it, somebody's making sure it's up and running and redundant. Not always the case, right? Well, at least in a single place. Correct.
Yeah. Right, but they may be just focused on their own specific thing, not necessarily looking at the application at large.
Yep.
Anything going on in the cloud in your world?
Not really. Not from a newsworthy perspective. Okay. Lots of interest in the cloud. Lots of interest in understanding how the multi-cloud world is gonna sort of play out. And now that we have our third one sort of in-house, I think we're going to start to see more and more of that sort of, thing happening, right? Customers coming to us saying, well, I got a little bit of Google, I got a little bit of AWS, got a little bit of Azure. How do I, sort of make it work together?
But I'll go back also to why, the purpose for these conversations that we record. You and I spend an inordinate amount of time out on the road getting to talk to different customers, and so we go in with our services and finely crafted PowerPoints.
Yes, finely crafted PowerPoints, because after all, you are the chief PowerPoint officer.
I am that.
CPPO.
CPPO.
Yeah.
But we go and we have these very formal meetings, whether they're having here at Rackspace or we go out and we do them on the road with customers. And then, as is most often the case, we'll take the customer to dinner. We'll go and we'll have conversations. And what tends to happen in the conversations that occur days or weeks later is they'll come back and you say, that PowerPoint and things we shared was good, but the conversation that we had is where we found value, because it's more, you don't have to have everything be as approved by legal or gone through the appropriate channels.
Not that we don't make sure that we are approved by legal.
But the reality is it's a conversation around how do you make a thing work in this new modern age. Now, everybody has got to think about how you're going to make your stuff work in this new modern age. It really doesn't matter if you're the veterinary clinic on the corner or whether you are a multinational company. You've got to figure these things out. And we're working with companies across all those sizes. And it's interesting, at a micro layer, they're trying to solve the same problems. At a macro level, the bigger companies just have more of them to solve.
Right. Well, they have more of them to solve, and the scale of the same problem is different.
Yeah.
So for a small company, logistics, being able to move product from one place to the other, or being able to track data, their big data is not nearly as big as the big data of a multinational retailer, for example, right? And so the problems are the same in many cases. It's just that they're enormous within that single problem.
And I would also argue that that's one of the reasons why moving to a public cloud has such value to your smaller companies, because when a big company moves in and says, okay, take all my data, now help me make sense of this data. And so the big cloud provider is going to rally some resources around it and say, we're going to create these pre-canned reports that are going to show you supply chain and demand and how to look at all of that compared to what you have on site and automate some of the potentially get in and automate some of the ordering of these products. And then what happens is these become capabilities, let's say, that are in Power BI from a visualization perspective of your big data. And now your small company can say, okay, well, my data's not as big as the big box on the corner. I can make use of the work that the cloud provider's done with the big box.
You bet. Well, it's the economies of scale, right?
Yeah.
I mean, you build it for the big guy, the little guy can take advantage of it.
Yeah.
And often what happens is that by putting more and more of the big guys on it and more of the little guys following, there's a price depression or a price, deceleration that happens, which makes it then affordable. I mean, take a look at some of the pricing announcements that have happened over the last month or two in Azure and AWS both. I mean, man, the stuff is getting cheap.
Indeed, it is.
Just so they're saving you money on the kind of the baseline features. So when they bring the really cool stuff out that they charge you $1 million a minute for, you got some budget left to go do that. Right? So,
we do a bunch of presenting together. One of those things is at the new employees who come into Rackspace, and we have a thing we do.
Those newbies.
We have a thing we do when we say something we think is important.
Yeah.
And I say, hey Kent.
Hey Jeff.
Do you know what you call somebody who has no body and no nose?
No body and no nose.
No. Nobody knows. So a little pun, as a little thing to go, oh, that was so painful.
I can't get away from
it. Maybe we should pay attention to what they just said. And I would say, yes, you should, because of the economies of scale that exist when these big boxes and big companies move into these hyperscale clouds, the work that those cloud providers do to create value to them in that space are things that everybody can benefit downstream.
Well, and there's incentive on both sides. There's incentive for the cloud provider to keep pushing the envelope, keep figuring out machine learning, container management, whatever it is.
Yeah.
But then the incentive on the small guy is to be able to move to that capability so that they are able to take advantage of the same kind of things the big boys have.
Yeah.
And this is the interesting part about it is that, 10 years ago or way back, 20 years ago, right? If you were a small business, you were kind of at the mercy of your local Office Depot or that kind of thing. You had to buy a computer, you had to figure out how to put a server in, you had to
print business cards.
Absolutely. You had to have the Geek Squad from Best Buy come out and do something for you. And that's great, and it worked. But now the ability for you to go to a cloud provider and literally click a button and go, you know what, I really need a Hadoop instance to do big data with streaming analytics. Click a button. Yeah, and there it is, right? And then when you're done with it, you turn it off and you're not paying for it. I mean, I got to say, and we keep talking about it. This has been around for a while, but it's still so cool.
It is still so cool. Now, it's just because it's there doesn't mean it's easy.
Correct.
So still work with we are professionals. You can try some of this at home. Hopefully, you won't.
But yeah, you shouldn't. You really should.
Yeah,
actually, they should.
Because if they get scared, they can turn it off.
Just
make sure you turn it off, otherwise the meter continues to spin. Just turning off your computer doesn't cause the meter to stop spinning.
And then you get a bill that looks like the first time you gave your kid texting. Right before we had unlimited texting, and the bill came up, and it was 9,000 pages.
You have told that story multiple times, but I want to tell you my experience.
Yeah.
My experience was, hey, when I get this thing, I can set up this clicker, and it'll give me a text notification. I was the teenager in that context. I had to call my wife. I said, "Oh boy." All right, that's what's going on in the cloud. That's what's new from this past couple of weeks' perspective. But it doesn't matter.
So we always though now want to delve into the specific topic.
Yes.
We need to get something placed deep, and you have been spending a lot of time on what I will call sort of Azure everywhere.
Yeah.
I mean, really, right? That's really what it is. So tell us a little bit more about it.
All right, so Microsoft has been working super hard, and by super hard I mean like for a really long time, and both on their marketing engine and on their engineering. We'll talk about that in a minute. On a product coming out that's called, wait for it, Azure Stack. But wait, you were just talking about Azure. What would that mean? So Azure Stack is literally, I like to call it the dehydrated version of Azure. It is a condensed version of Azure. Is it still Azure? 100% it's still Azure, but it's just less features, but it's basically all of the same code base. So when you open up ultimately the portal interface for Azure, and you open up the portal interface for Azure Stack, it looks the exact same. Do you know why it looks the exact same?
Because it is the exact same.
It is the exact same.
That's what I've read. Now, I haven't messed with Azure Stack much. I played a little bit with the lab version that we have here. But my understanding is that it really is the same fabric that's running Azure is running Azure Stack. Right? I mean, that's just, that boggles my mind, because now what you've got is you've got this, what is it, 38 regions? Is that what you said? 36, whatever they are. You've got this multi-region capability now pulled down to a localized environment, a more manageable environment, and an environment that can be, if I understand it correctly, it can be essentially a single tenant. It can be private.
Yeah. So Microsoft is thinking about a couple of different ways for this product to be consumed by individual companies or even service providers. And so one of those ways is, as you mentioned, is a single tenant. So maybe the company has a need, and that need is to use Azure-like resources or Azure resources, but they need it to either be in a single tenant data center where nobody else can touch it because they have a perceived, a corporate mandate or an industry mandate that says ne'er their data shall touch anybody else's. Or maybe they need to be in a region where Azure isn't. And so what they can ultimately do then is they can install and configure, actually it's pretty easy, we'll talk about that in a minute, an Azure interface in that Azure environment, and that will run on in production, it's going to run on as small as 4 servers, and at launch, either as much as 12 or 16. We've actually, just this week, gotten a little bit of conflicting information on that, so more to come. Ultimately, 1 rack. You're going to get 1 rack.
Yeah, but you're not talking about having to have a massive data center to do this.
No.
And in order to stand it up for a single tenant, right? It's not a lot of resource.
No, and in a fully populated rack of capabilities inside of there for resources, you could very realistically see 500, 600, 700 VMs running in that environment.
Wow.
Because there's an element of oversubscription that, as you know your workload, you can oversubscribe, and oversubscription to you at home ultimately means that you can allocate more resources that are going to get shared by potentially different applications.
So you can actually allocate more resources than you necessarily really have.
Exactly.
Okay. All right.
And what it means ultimately is, let's say from a processor perspective, processors have cores, mini processors that run inside of them. And let's say a rack has 250 ultimately consumable cores.
Okay.
Well, if you oversubscribe them by 300%, then you effectively have 600 cores that you can make available to your applications. It means there's some sharing, there's some swapping going on there, but not every application needs to be accessing that processor at the same time.
Right.
And basically what that does then is it makes the hypervisor be a traffic cop who gets access to it.
Well, if you think about it, right, there are going to be some applications that sit dormant, right? Especially in the evening, like if you're doing batch processing, right? You're thinking about retail or a bank and you're batch processing things. You have a bunch of your day apps, that are not running, and they're just like sitting. So the oversubscription makes sense.
Yeah. So Azure Stack. So it is Azure. Now it's been delayed. We had hoped to see it mid last year.
It's Microsoft. I didn't.
But it's we say that, but what they're doing is taking ultimately just shy of 1,000 servers and turning it into 4.
Look, just the simple fact that they have a way to say you have 256 cores, but I will let you oversubscribe it by 300%.
Yes.
Okay, I can't even imagine. I'm a developer. I can't even imagine.
Give you a rights-controlled interface to be able to administer that environment like that, separate from administering the workloads that are going into each subscription. All right, so let's finish talking about the hardware. So the hardware itself is what's called hyper-converged hardware, which means when you get one of these racks, you get a rack that has a couple of top-of-rack switches. That's how you get data in and out of the rack, and then a bunch of servers that are fully populated with storage. Now, where, you ask, does all of the the SAN go, the direct attached storage, things we've been used to using for a number of years? Well, that doesn't exist in this context because it's a completely software-defined environment. And so when we say a software-defined environment or software-defined data center, what we mean is, well, while there are top-of-rack switches, there's no routers in there. There's no other networking here. There's no additional storage, and then you've got your your hypervisors, where the VMs run. And so what Azure Stack is doing is it is allowing you to manage the networking layer and the storage area as a software-defined article.
Okay.
it's software-defined networking and it's software-defined storage.
So does that mean, and I've seen pictures, but I'm obviously not a hardware expert. Does that mean that the servers that I have in there are both, traditional compute and storage essentially in the same frame?
Exactly
so that I don't have the dishwasher size sand sitting somewhere?
Right.
I mean, I guess I could connect to that if I wanted to at some point, if I needed to, but the idea is to really bring it into its own little world. And
it all runs
there.
native to the Azure Stack. So what they're using is a product that's recent to Windows Server 2016, and that is Storage Spaces Direct. And so Storage Spaces Direct is really the underpinnings of the software-defined storage in Azure Stack. And again, it's just going to look at all of the storage that's available across all of your hypervisors. And it is going to allow you then to carve that up into usable LUNs that then be made available. And those LUNs could be defined by size, the amount of storage that's there, the speed of the drives it's running on, are they SAS drives or are they SSD drives? And then make those available to resources inside of Azure. And if you're a company that is putting a single tenant environment together, and as such, you then want to do a chargeback model, you could actually even charge back more to the company, to the individual departments who are utilizing those other resources.
Yeah.
So software defined. Where do the routers go? Where do my Cisco routers go? Where do my F5 load balancers go? Well, they become appliances inside of.
So when you say appliances, that we're talking about virtual, soft.
Thank you, virtual appliances.
Things, right?
Yeah,
that's what we're talking about.
It's not the one rack unit thing that goes to the top. Those don't exist anymore.
It's kind of like
everything
it is kind of like a VM, or it is a VM.
It is a VM. Absolutely, it's a VM. Ultimately, it's a Windows or Linux VM that has their code on top of it. But you would access from the marketplace, and we learned a whole lot last week, in the past week or so, from Microsoft around what's happening in Azure Stack, because they released Technical Preview 3. By the time you're seeing this, it will have been out a couple of weeks. We're recording this one a little bit in advance. And so these types of things are made available. If you were out inside of Azure, they'd be available through the marketplace.
Okay.
Right? So if you were inside of Azure Stack, guess where they're available?
Okay, inside the
marketplace in your Azure Stack. And so you have the ability to, and here's Andre, one of our coworkers' favorite phrase, and that is, and Microsoft uses it, you get to curate your own gallery, your own marketplace.
Interesting. So now, do the things from the public marketplace, are they part of this? Can they be part of it?
They can be as part of subscribe. You basically subscription model. So as the administrator, you can go in and subscribe to the things in the public marketplace that you want to be made available in the private marketplace.
Got it. Okay. So if I'm a developer and I've developed the latest, greatest thing that I want to have as a marketplace offering, just like I have in Azure, you, Company X, could see that and go, I really want that as part of my Azure Stack.
That's right.
You go subscribe to it, and you basically have the capability to deploy it in your Azure Stack.
Yes. But I don't have to take it wholesale, give me the entire thing or give me nothing, which is nice. So I can take it as pieces.
Yeah. Well, and especially if you are trying to have some sort of governance around what your employees are spending their money on, right? Because some of those marketplace things, they are vastly more expensive than I was prepared for. I've fired a couple of them up and blown my subscriptions out pretty quick. So
but it's it's a great way for ISVs to get their products made available inside of Azure and made available in pretty short order.
So now, talking about, because I'm a developer, right? That's my background, and I spent a lot of time trying to develop things for the cloud, trying to figure out what it looks like to put applications in the cloud. And I wrote a bunch of tooling and a bunch of capabilities and utilities that work with the Azure Resource Manager in public, I guess what I'm going to call public Azure, as opposed to private Azure. Do those toolings and those things still work? Do they still make sense for me to have that tooling? Am I going to have to make a lot of changes to them, et cetera? What's that going to look like?
So again, the underpinnings of Azure Stack is just Azure. In fact, the number they're quoting is 98% code parity, code match.
Wow.
So if you were a developer, and this is really applicable specifically if you're just moving all your stuff into Azure Stack, but the use case that we see is where companies will, they need Azure Stack for a reason. We don't care about the reason for this conversation, but production has to run in Azure Stack. But they still may want to use Azure for the development environment.
Sure.
So in that case, all the tools you're used to, all the deployment methods you're used to, but at the point you're ready to go from your test environment, your dev test environment out there, maybe to a QA inside of Azure Stack or production in Azure Stack, you're just going to change the endpoint.
Okay.
So all the scripts, all the tools, all the APIs, everything that you're used to in Azure are going to be over in Azure Stack. Now, I have to make the caveat. Again, it's dehydrated Azure. It's less of what is out in Azure. You're not going to get things like machine learning or Power BI, things that take rows and rows and cabinets of compute to be able to render or do the data.
Well, at least not yet.
Not yet.
I mean,
Not there yet.
I was going to say I'm never going to count Microsoft out on putting that
At
stuff
launch
in
time,
there,
sometime this year, hopefully mid-year. Microsoft has not released the date. This is what will come in the first launch of the product.
Okay.
So if your environment needs to have some of those things that aren't available yet, then it's not going to run in Azure unless you have a way that's connecting it. But it's not going to be native in Azure. You're not going to get Power BI in Azure Stack on launch day.
Right.
So,
but you can obviously go to public Azure and use Power BI there, right?
Yeah.
And then just connect the two up, right?
You could.
That's what we're after. So.
And that's really where we also see this having a tremendous value to customers, and that is the ability to truly make a hybrid application or have a hybrid deployment of Azure and Azure Stack. In fact, the thing we've really kind of gravitated around is this is the only hyperscale cloud that truly has a consistent hybrid play.
That's correct.
Yeah. So while VMware will run on dedicated instances in AWS, it still is VMware running in AWS. It's not AWS running in your data center.
Right.
And as Google has their 6 regions and their data centers that run inside of there, you aren't ever, today, you don't have the ability to run Google compute inside of your data center. This is literally Azure, condensed version of, running in your data center.
Well, and when we think about the kinds of things that most of our customers are doing with Azure today, and that for at least for the foreseeable future we'll be doing. I mean, a lot of that is the things that will be in Azure Stack. I mean, obviously network compute storage, that sort of thing, the standard sorts of things, service bus, those kind of things. I'm assuming those will be part of it. But as you said, the thing I think that's really cool about it is that it isn't as though we've done some stripped down version of the features that are there.
Yeah.
The features that are in Azure Stack are the features that are in Azure.
Yes.
It's just that some features in Azure haven't made it to Stack yet.
So let's also, just to really drive the comparison home, talk about Azure Pack. And that is what we have in production here at Rackspace today from a private cloud perspective. Azure Pack is an Azure consistent experience, an Azure V1 consistent experience, but it's made up of a couple of key pieces of technology: Windows Server, Hyper-V, System Center, and the application called Azure Pack. And with all of that, you pick up orchestration, virtualization, and some as-a-service capabilities, and a pretty website.
Right, because you can do like database as a service. I think you can do websites. There is a service bus and kind of thing in there, and storage, right? Yeah.
But the reality is it's not the same code. It is like it. It's a web page, which is similar. It's a web page that looks like Azure V1, but it's not Azure.
Well, there's still some juggling then of your resources, right? I mean, if you're going to move an application from one to the other, you're still having to think about the fact that, well, this is Microsoft Private Cloud, with Azure Pack, versus this is the full-blown Azure that's out. Okay.
All right, so that's my first brain dump on Azure Stack. The first, and I
feel like there's going to be many more.
And so as we go through this in the future, through our events in the future, we're going to start taking a section and talk about Azure Stack, because I think it is that important for you to truly understand what it is. If you're that vet clinic running down on the corner that's a single small business type of an environment, Azure Stack probably doesn't play a big part in your future.
Probably not.
But if you're larger than that, it absolutely does.
Well, certainly larger than that, or even if you're small and you have compliance needs or privacy needs or whatever that might put you into a prem-based system like Azure Stack. I mean, there's some huge advantage there. So.
Absolutely. So Azure Stack, we're going to talk about more of that in the future. Microsoft has been fantastic with giving us access to the production team on that, and being able to have access to understanding what's going on, what's coming, when it's coming, so that we can be prepared to help support. So what we're getting to share with you now are things that have been released from NDA, and of course in the future only sharing the stuff that's been released.
Well, and I think what's going to be really fun to watch is the ability for you to share sort of here's where we're headed from the platform perspective, and me sort of giving some commentary around as a developer and as a deployment person, what does it look like to push workloads into? I think there's some exciting stuff.
There is, and if you're somebody in this space as well, and you're going to be at that Azure Stack Airlift happening at the end of March, we'll be there in force. I'll be there. Connect. Shoot us a note. Shoot me a note. Let me know. Find me on the Twitters or any of those.
And in a couple of months, you and I are going to be at Build.
We will be at Build.
We'll be talking more about that as time rolls forward.
Yeah, he's going to have to teach me what development means. I feel I may be a little over my head, but I'm excited to swim in the deep end.
I don't think I've ever seen you over your head, but it might be refreshing to see it. So absolutely.
All right, folks. Thanks for watching this episode. We hope you're finding it valuable. If you have any questions, you want to correct us, you want to encourage us, you want us to talk about something, shoot us a note. He's Kent, and you can find him at kent@thecloudist.com. I am Jeff at thecloudist.com, and we'll be back here in another week or two with another one of these with more so exciting information.
Absolutely. Scintillating banter, just sizzling topics.
Exactly. I think we should bring in another guest speaker.
Absolutely.
Those are always good fun.
You bet.
So watch for that. I'm on vacation next week.
Are you?
In fact, when this comes out, I'll be in the Hill Country.
You'll be in the Hill Country.
Yep.
Fantastic.
Cowboy hat, hanging out.
Shooting, well, never mind. I'm not even going to go there. So,
all right. Hey, thanks, guys. I'm Jeff DeVerter.
I'm Kent Kingery.
We're the Cloudists.
See ya.
Bye.
Fantastic.
I love the switching. My idea mid-stroke for that is to get one of your MIDI pedals.
Yeah, or even just buttons that are right here.
That way when you're doing something, if I want to grab it and push it to get you.